Hey everybody, it's your friend Adam. I'm here with Warren Mosler, the godfather of MMT, and I have about 13 questions here. I don't know if we're going to get through all these questions, but I wanted to aim this discussion at the MMT jobs program because it seems like that is relevant now, and I hear a lot of people talking about it, potentially straw manning it. Mosler can give us his take on it. But before we get into the jobs program, I wanted to ask you a little bit of like a strategic question. I'm super fascinated by MMT. I'm sort of dragging my audience along for the ride, but I'm curious if in the current political environment, we're doing more harm than good just by talking about MMT in a way that's only catering to like a left-wing audience. My audience is very much like split left and right. So I wanted to get your opinion on that.
Well, one of my originals from 1995 was Michael Johns, who's founder of the Tea Party, and is still, a strong proponent. And so he was a strong Trump supporter and about as conservative as you can be. And then there's John Carney, who was at CNBC, and now he's at, hope I'm pronouncing it right, Breitbart. And he's like 100% on board with it. And so it's apolitical. It's just how the machine works, how the tool works. Once you understand how the tool works, you apply it to get your job done, the job done that you want to see done. So there's nothing inherently political about it.
Okay, and this is one of the reasons why I was interested in talking to you, because you definitely have that slant, but I do see people on the right kind of mischaracterizing MMT a bit, which I don't think is helpful, and people on the left as well. Sometimes they pitch the thing that we're going to talk about, the jobs program, as something that I don't necessarily think you're pitching it as. You first of all, you want to just lay out your pitch for the jobs program?
Yeah. So you have to understand where it's coming from. So it starts with the MMT money story. You hear money stories about people on a desert island and exchange seashells or something. They came up with the idea that started with barter and went to money. Well, that's got nothing to do with today's currencies, regardless of what they might have been 100 years or 1,000 years ago. What they are now is what they are now. And what they are the states use their currencies to provision themselves. That means the state wants soldiers, it wants public health workers, it wants a legal system. And it's got to get people, resources out of the private sector into the public sector. Now that leaves the private sector with less, but presumably, even with less, with fewer people working in the private sector, the state is better off overall because we can defend ourselves, because we have a legal system and we have contract law and all this other public infrastructure that the state provides. So the presumption is the state is provisioning itself to serve public purpose and make so that we're all better off, from this process. And we can get into whether they're successful at that or not. That's a whole different argument. Okay, so how does the state provision itself? So the first thing it does, and all state monetary systems begin with a tax liability. In other words, they levy a tax. And for purposes of example, I use a property tax because it's very easy to understand. All the taxes are work, but some of them are very complex. The property tax is very simple. So let's say they put a tax on everybody's house of a certain amount. Now, it doesn't start with the state collecting money. It starts with the state putting a tax on your house. That's called levying a tax, establishing tax liabilities. Okay, so first they put on this tax, and it's payable in something you've never heard of. Let's call it the US dollar. So it's property tax payable in US dollars. That monetizes the economy. That creates an economy where suddenly people are looking for jobs that pay in dollars because now they need them to pay the tax. And if they don't have the dollars, somebody's going to lose their house or worse. And it doesn't need to be everybody, but somebody's going to lose their house. So somebody is willing to work to earn US dollars. Somebody is willing to make pizzas and sell them for US dollars because, there's this big drain of US dollars on the economy called this tax liability on your house. So the state establishes a tax liability for the purpose of creating people who need and want dollars and are willing to sell things to get dollars. So they create tax liabilities to create sellers of goods and services who want dollars. Okay, and that's the critical understanding at the beginning. They don't put taxes on, liabilities on to get the money. Okay, they get it to create people looking for work for dollars. Okay, now because they've created a population of people looking to work for dollars, they can go out and hire those people to be soldiers and public health workers and judges and lawyers, whatever they want. All right, and so the government imposes tax liabilities to create a need, which creates unemployment. This is the source of unemployment, and that's a unique MMT contribution to the history of economic thought. Taxes are the source of unemployment, tax liabilities. So the government creates tax liabilities, which creates unemployed people, people looking for paid work, not people looking to volunteer for the American Cancer Society, okay? People looking for paid work. The government then hires them to work in the government, which was the point of the whole thing. So now we have a legal system of military and public health. Okay? The government then pays these people, okay, who then pay their taxes and buy things from other people who then can pay their taxes. And the payment of taxes is the last thing that takes place. So it goes tax liability to create unemployment. The government hires the people who it caused to be unemployed by their tax liability by design, right? Mm-hmm. And then it pays them, and then the taxes get paid. So that's the basic, that's the MMT money story. That's what's at the core of every monetary system in the world today. The dollar, the yen, the British pound, you name it, the euro, it's all the same. Those are the nuts and bolts. Now what happens invariably is the tax liability is too strong. It creates more unemployed than even the government wants to hire. All right. Now what I say is, okay, I'll give them the benefit of the doubt. They made a mistake. Why would you put on tax liabilities to create more unemployed than you want to hire? That's disruptive. You're causing people to be unemployed with no way to get a job. Okay, the only source of the money to pay taxes comes from the government or its agents. We've designated commercial banks as agents, which is another story, but they're all agents of the government. It's a monopoly. And so the government has created, all the residual unemployment we have is created by the government, created because their tax liability was too high. It was more than enough to get the people they wanted to work. So how do we get those people back into the private sector? Nobody wants them to be unemployed. Everybody wants them to be working, producing useful output. Okay, well, so the government, I see, has two choices at this point. You can either hire the rest of the people it created, that its unemployment, its tax liabilities caused to become unemployed. You can go out and hire them, and we can just have a larger government, but, that presumably they don't want them. Okay, presumably they've got the government set at the level they want. They don't want everybody working for the government. They want some people building cars and making vaccines and doing all kinds of things in the private sector, taking care of all our restaurants and movie theaters and all this. We're not. The whole point of the exercise is not to have everybody in the government. Congress decides we want to have 5 million government employees or whatever it is. Okay, but we've got 10 million, extras showed up for unemployed. What do? So we lower taxes to get them back in the private sector. We can hire more if we want to. Maybe they didn't hire everybody they want. Maybe they need more police officers. Maybe they need more public health workers. But at some point they don't. And the rest we want to transition back into the private sector. Okay, so the way you do that is to lower the tax liability, and then there'll be enough spending and demand from the tax cut in the private sector to hire these people back, except for one thing. Unemployment has stigmatized the unemployed. They become damaged goods. Once you're unemployed, it's twice as hard to get a job. Businesses prefer to hire people already working. They always have, always will, because it's much lower risk. Because people are already working, they come in on time, they have a supervisor that can give them a recommendation. They're probably not on drugs, to an extent where they can't work. They have.
I have further questions about that. Yeah, definitely.
Yes, okay.
We'll dive into that in detail.
Sure.
Just to be clear here, though, this is another part of the jobs program that I don't think all I really see is left people on the left advocating for the jobs program. So they never pitch in like the fact that you're talking about lowering taxes, which I think is something that the right would be totally on board with. So
Right.
I'm trying to think of a way that to pitch the jobs program that it's not so one-sided. Like I've seen some like videos on it where they're only advocating left-wing spending, which just screams, okay, this is left-wing pie in the sky, something that can't necessarily happen.
Yeah, well, it can happen. You
Yeah.
can't have a government that has 75% of people working for it. That's a political choice.
Yes.
And there are people who would like to see that happen, and that's their political choice. And there are other people who like to see more private sector and less public sector. So this story tells you exactly how to tailor it to what you want. So at some level, there's a right-sized government for you, and it might be 50-50. It might be 25-75. It might be 75-25.
And what are those proportions? Private sector, public sector?
Public sector, yeah.
Okay.
Number of people in the private plus public sector.
So you're saying 75% public sector and 25% private sector?
For some people, you have European countries that have more than 50% public sector because medical's in the public sector.
Okay.
We have about 25% of GDP and 27% is spent by the government because medical is in the private sector. So it depends on where you want to position people, public sector or private sector. Congress makes that decision. So let's say they've made it today and we're at 27% private sector, and that's where we want to be. We don't want to go to 30 or 35. If we want to go to 30 or 35, Congress can vote that, and then they can go out and hire more people to do that. They can hire the unemployed to do that, to have normal public sector jobs. You don't need a job guarantee for that. If you want more people in the public sector, you don't put them on a job guarantee, just hire them. The public sector has fought long and hard for proper compensation for public employees. You don't hire people at $15 an hour in a job guarantee for police officers. You pay them $70,000 or $80,000, whatever you're supposed to pay a police officer. You don't. To me, look, decide what you want in the public sector as a political decision, and hire those people properly, the way we already do, and don't try and bring them in at bargain wages through this job guarantee thing to provision the public sector. You're undermining yourself in a lot of different ways when you do that. You're not getting the quality you want at the jobs, probably, and you're undermining the whole pay scale and the whole morale of the private sector, public sector we have, which is, that's not the point of the exercise either. So let me just finish the last part.
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, so we've got this right-sized government, whatever that is. Let's say it's where we are today, 27%. We've got an extra 5 million unemployed, I think, still with the COVID thing. We need to lower taxes to get those people back in the private sector. If the problem is, and they would go back, but they won't go back because the private sector doesn't want to hire them. They hire people already working before they hire unemployed. They give them a very low priority. And so we'll get wage price pressures and prices when we have very high levels of unemployment. In Europe, they claim, the NAIRU is 10% or something, where if they let unemployment get under 10%, they get inflation. Why? Because the private sector doesn't want to hire the unemployed. So what I'm saying is, all right, how do we get these people back into the private sector?
I hate to interrupt, Warren. I just want to make sure my audience knows it's completely clear here. So you're saying even though we have 5 to 10% unemployment, that unemployment can still cause inflation if you lower taxes and incentivize people to hire because they don't want to hire from this pool of 10% unemployed. So they're going to try to lure jobs away from someone who's already working. That's going to drive up wages. Those driving up the wages is going to drive up the cost of goods. That's what's going to cause price inflation.
Yes, and it happens every cycle. It's called hysteresis.
Right.
It's not some kind of operation you get. It's a.
I know. The argument that you make about like government spending in times of surplus just makes complete sense to me. It sounds ridiculous, but the intuitive thing that people have in their minds is, well, of course, during good times, that's a time when you grow the government. No. The time that you grow the government is when things are dirt cheap and you can get them for half price.
Okay, but let me get back to that. That's an important point. So how do we get people who the private sector doesn't want to hire them? We offer them a transition job. We offer a job to anybody willing and able to work who wants to transition back to the private sector. Okay, we'd like to hire you, but we have enough police officers, we have enough teachers, we have enough people holding hands at nursing homes. We don't want any more people in the public sector. Congress has decided we're at 27. Right now what we have is a right-sized government. I'm not saying it is, but we got to have a starting point here. All right. So by offering them a transition job, now they're coming in to work every day. They're take a bath. They don't get in fights. They have a supervisor. They will get hired and they will transition into the private sector that has expanding aggregate demand. And this has been proven or demonstrated over and over again throughout history. The HEFACE program that several of my colleagues implemented in Argentina in 2001 did exactly that. After the peso blew up with 32 dead in the street in Buenos Aires and they floated the exchange rate, Daniel Kosar at the Labor Ministry got this program through where they offered the Jefe de Hogar, this employment program. They offered a job to any head of household who wanted to work. They limited it to head of households. I would not do that, but they did. They got a population of 33 million. They got something like 2 million people entering this program over the next couple of years. They only paid like 100 pesos a month. It was nothing. And out of those 2 million, 1 million transitioned into the private sector. These were people who had never had a private sector job, were never expected to. They were largely disadvantaged class like Indians and mixed breeds, whatever down there that they considered disadvantaged. And they had the best economy in the world with the best growth, employment growth and everything else while this happened. India is doing it with the rural poor. Yes, they have all kinds of corruption problems. And if you want to get a job, you got to pay off the guy hiring you. I mean, it's pretty bad, but it works. It helps people transition, and it's one of the contributors to the success of that economy. Not that it's a complete success, but that it is. So we have more than sufficient evidence to show that this works to transition people into the private sector. So I call it the transition job. The primary purpose is to transition people from unemployment, where they're already in the public sector. Once you're unemployed, you've been pulled out of the private sector by the public sector, by the tax liability. Public sector's already got you. They're leaving you there to rot, paying you a little unemployment compensation. It transitions you back into the private sector so that GDP, everything else can expand. Okay, now so I've always called it from day one a transition job. Okay, and that is its purpose from a monetary point of view. And that makes it a better price anchor than unemployment. Because with unemployment, the number goes up and up and up with each cycle. It's the hysteresis I talked about. And it's like germs and antibiotics. They don't work after a while. And you get inflation even with high levels of unemployment. With the transition job, it doesn't happen. You can keep this transition job at a much lower percentage of the labor force, maybe 2 or 3%, maybe 1 or 2. When Australia had the railroads as a transition job way back, I think they had under 2% unemployment with little or no inflation. Because this becomes a viable group of people willing and able to work that are attractive to the private sector rather than unattractive. So if you have two choices to fight inflation, unemployment or an employed buffer stock, you would use an employed buffer stock every time. It's just a much more effective price anchor. If you're worried about inflation, get your unemployed people working to make them attractive so that you don't have inflation in the private sector from labor shortages. Okay, so that is, bipartisan. That's not political.
Yeah, no, I agree. And so much of it is just people's moral intuitions. Like if all the goodies that they're advertising in this appeal to the left's moral intuitions, it appears to be just for left-leaning people. I have a couple questions about the specifics of the job program. But I want to ask you, we were talking about inflation. These are the questions that I constantly get, and I'm assuming you're getting them too. You might have better answers than me. Does the government jobs program need to add to GDP in order to prevent price inflation? Like, do these jobs...
Sure what that means.
Well, okay, do these, like, there's an equation that goes on here.
The answer is no, because these people are unemployed right now.
Right.
They're getting paid for doing nothing.
Right. They don't add to the GDP, obviously.
Right.
Yeah.
So even if in this job they did not add to GDP, it's not going to be any worse than it is now. So it's not going to add anything to what we
Correct.
Okay. But if there's any if they're transitioning into the private sector, adding to the supply side at a much higher pace, and it shrinks to 2% in the job guarantee versus 6% unemployed, then it's definitely in favor of the job guarantee, right? Because you've got that many fewer people that are not adding to supply. But the way I'll say it is you can also get them to add to supply. So I'm not saying you can't, but I'm saying worst case, you're still way better off with this transition job than you are with unemployment.
And by supply, you mean productivity. There's an equation that
real output.
Right. And this is one of the most fascinating things for me about MMT, because people who aren't familiar with economics don't necessarily think, okay, there's a basket of goods that we're producing every single year, and that basket of goods is a certain quantity. And that figures into the equation of the monetary supply. It's not just a one-to-one. If you increase the money supply, you're going to get inflation. If that basket grows at 10x and the money supply grows at 2x, you're going to get deflation.
Well, look, if you define the money supply with a narrow definition like M1 or M2, you can get 10 times growth in the money supply with deflation, because it's not like relevant to inflation.
Yeah.
So they've got such narrow definitions of money supply that they don't work. Now, the Fed and all central banks have tried to come up with definitions of the money supply, M1, M2, M3, M4, P star, SL. They've come up with all kinds of things, trying to come up with something that helps them decide whether it's inflationary or not, and they gave up. They don't even publish those things anymore. So you can talk about money supply, but what you're talking about, you don't realize it, is the foreign exchange reserves or gold reserves under a fixed exchange rate policy. You're not talking about today's floating exchange rate currencies. And so these people who look at money supply and inflation, Austrian School of Economics, it's all valid, but it's valid under fixed exchange rate regimes. So
Right.
Today that would be Bulgaria and Hong Kong, but not anywhere else. I guess Panama maybe, but if you're dollarized with fixed exchange rate, fine. But it basically doesn't apply to any of the major countries today. So it's not wrong, all this talk about money supply, but you just have to look at whether it's applicable or not to your particular country. And for 90%, 180 out of the world's 180 something currencies, it's not applicable. We have floating exchange rate policy.
Okay, so to prevent a jobs program from competing with the private sector, how do we regularly move people out of the jobs program? Is there a time limit to these jobs? I also noticed that a lot of people are pitching this as like a job that someone is going to have for the rest of their lives. They're talking about adding on like health benefits and all these. So it doesn't necessarily click as a temporary job.
Yeah. Okay. So it's a transition job. It will be the lowest paying job in the economy because it's open to anybody who's willing and able to work. So let's just pick a number. I think $15 an hour is the latest one being thrown around. If anybody can get a job at $15 an hour, then nobody can hire anybody at less than that. So that is going to be disruptive to companies paying less than $15 an hour. They're going to have to increase pay or lose their employees. Now, some people think that's a good thing. I don't want to go there now because it's not critical to the understanding. But I've always said, look, let's start at a non-disruptive wage. So today, non-disruptive might be $15 an hour, it might be $12. But the point of this thing is not to be disruptive. And there's a reason for that. And the reason is it's setting a numeraire that's all other prices are going to gravitate towards and be based around. So in a purely competitive economy, which we don't have, it actually doesn't matter where you set the wage because you'll get a one-time adjustment to it. If you set it at $30 an hour, maybe prices would double and then they'd stay there. If you set it at $300 an hour, prices would go up 20 times and then they'd stay there. It doesn't create a continuous shift. It creates a new base case, a new starting point. So I always said, let's start at a non-disruptive wage. So maybe 15 is non-disruptive because from what I've been reading now, pretty much everybody's already there. So let's assume $15 is non-disruptive. So let's start at 15. And after a year, if you decide you want to change it, you change it. You can make it 16, you can make it 14. Congress is not locked into this. Okay, so you need a starting point. Whatever the starting point is going to be, we're going to be a lot better off than we are with today's unemployment. So if we start off at 12, we're a lot better off. If we start off at 17, we're a lot better off. If we start off at 15, we're a lot better off. We're going to have less inflation. We might have a one-time upward adjustment of a couple of tenths, because that part of the labor force earning that money is relatively small, and the income they earn is even smaller. So we might have a one-time adjustment of a few tenths on inflation, but then it just stops right there. And so the price level might go up, but then the rate of inflation doesn't keep going up. It stops, because this is a much stronger buffer stock than unemployment. We get two-way flow. We get people leaving this initially by the millions to get regular private sector jobs, because they're so much that more attractive to the private sector now that they're already working.
Well,
So
we
it's a win-win for everybody.
We should talk about what the jobs are, though, because
so let's talk
like
about
if the job is super easy for $15 an hour, that people are going to gravitate to this program. Like someone might take a job in the private sector that's $10 an hour. That's easier than whatever the government job is. If it's
so, there will be that kind of an adjustment, and that's how the market adjusts anyway. Okay, now of course, you can point to all the anomalies in that, like some of the more difficult jobs, like, people work that are really under miserable conditions. Some of those earn the least amount of money, where, people sitting in the office doing nothing because,
I know the white collar jobs, they make like, $30 an hour. Yeah.
I don't want to say it, but, certain government jobs.
I know.
The interface between the government and the population is not good right now. So that's another area that needs improvement.
We're in agreement. We're in total agreement there. Yeah.
But again, I see the absolute need for the public sector, whether we do it right or not. And I've got all these proposals to do it right, but that's a different point. Okay. I'm not covering for anybody. There's like I've been in the private sector a lot. And there's a lot of people earning a lot of money, and a lot of Wall Street companies that I wouldn't make coffee in my office. But
right.
That's a different thing. Okay, so where were we? So let me give you an example.
Okay.
So what I would say is all nonprofits can hire people, can be reimbursed under the job guarantee for people doing work for the qualifying nonprofit. So if the Congress decides, or they have an agency that decides the American Cancer Society qualifies, they can pay people $15 an hour. They have to put the time in. That's the critical part. They can't just sit at home and get a check. They've got to be putting the hours in. Now, some people are going to cheat and whatnot, but we have to have it, regulated and supervised sufficiently so that we have some comfort level that the time is, for the most part, being put in. And now that will set the standard you're talking about. So if that's a pretty easy job, stuffing envelopes or making phone calls or going, to hospitals, holding hands with cancer patients that people want to do and they're getting paid, the private sector will have to pay more than that to get people to do what they want them to do. Turn bolts on an automotive factory or something. Might be considered. Okay, so there might be a spread. So maybe they have to pay $10 an hour more to get people to do that. So here's $15 an hour as the standard based on nonprofit work versus $25 an hour we're going to have to pay. Fine, but that's not going to go, that spread's not going to increase over time. There'll be a spread that just stays there. And that's why I'm saying you get these one-time adjustments, which are already there, by the way. Unemployment's pretty cushy. You get paid to do nothing at home and pretend you're looking for a job, right? And so people have to pay.
Theoretically.
Yeah, so people have to pay 20 and 20. The average wage out there is about $25 an hour now. You'll get the average because you've got to pay people to do jobs that are, more demanding and require more skill and everything else.
Nonprofit.
So that's fine.
Well, my question though is, aren't nonprofits somewhat political? I know a lot of pushback on the jobs program is that these are going to become like political type jobs. People are going to, it's going to become a hammock instead of a safety net.
But it's only $15 an hour.
Right.
Anybody, you've got to put your time in. You can't just sit home. Anybody who aspires to do more than that is going to have to go out and earn it. So, okay, and it's not going to be, an impressive standard of living.
Right.
Yes, it can have health care because everybody should have that. We don't let people die in the streets. So we already have health care. It's just a question of how we deliver it. So it should include health care in an efficient manner. Right now, our health care is costing us, because of the private healthcare system, $500 billion a year in transaction costs and marketing costs and sales and multiple CFOs and all that we lose if we go to just Medicare for all, for example. It makes us all wealthier by the 500 billion, which is about 2% of GDP. It's a lot.
Do you
Yeah.
I'm curious.
Yeah.
This Warren is where we start losing the conservative audience because they're not necessarily for universal health care. I just want to ask, because my audience knows the difference between Medicare for all and the public.
I came up with a plan for the conservative side.
Okay,
which is, and it's dated, so the numbers are probably not right. But everybody gets $5,000 from the government for health care for the year. You get a Christmas present, you get $5,000 in your account for health care. $1,000 is for preventative, get your teeth cleaned and get checkups and all that. The other $5,000 is for your normal health care, what you need. Now, the other $4,000. Now, and all the doctors have to have price tags on their doors, just like gasoline stations, so you can shop.
Right.
Now, if you use up your $4,000, you're covered 100% by the government above that. But if you spend less than your $4,000 at the end of the year, you get that money personally as a Christmas present. So if I have $4,000, $5,000, you don't get back the part on preventative because we want you to get your teeth cleaned every year. But you do get, so the $1,000 you don't get back. That gets topped off every year. But I get $4,000. If I don't spend any of it, I get to keep the whole $4,000 for the year. If I'm healthy and I exercise. If I spend it all, fine, I don't get any Christmas present.
Warren, I don't want to get sidetracked. I'm curious because you said Medicare for all, which Medicare for all is, there's a difference between Medicare for all and the public option. I'm in favor of the public option. I'm not necessarily.
I would just lower the age of Medicare from 65 to 0.
Right, but
if people don't want to take it, they can go get their private if they want. But
okay, good. That's all I wanted to hear, because I think Bernie was campaigning on like dissolving private health insurance. I think it's one of the reasons why.
Do you know anybody who's over 65 on Medicare that has private other than the supplemental? No.
I don't know. No,
probably not. Yeah. Okay. There might be a couple people, but who cares?
So let's get back to the jobs program, because I don't necessarily know, because you still really haven't said, how do we keep these people from being in the jobs program for 20 years? That's what people are really worried about.
The same way, you keep, right now we got people who've been unemployed for a while. We have a long-term unemployed.
Yeah, I know.
Okay, so it's not any worse than that. At least they're in a jobs program doing something that's presumably useful.
Okay.
Rather than being long-term unemployed. We're not going to have more people than that. People aren't going to take a pay cut to do this because you'll get a spread. The employers will pay whatever it takes. It's only a one-time adjustment. Right now, that adjustment's already there. It's more than enough.
Okay.
You just need to show these people work. They're going to be calling the American Cancer Society to say, hey, you got somebody who wants to work for me, I'm paying $25 an hour. They're going to get people. They'll get people who want to go from 15 to 25. Okay, just like we do now. Except they don't want the people who are unemployed.
No, I get that.
A week. Yeah,
I get that. What happens to people who slack off or problems at work? Do they get fired? Will they get regular unemployment benefits, or will they be left without any assistance?
So 2 things. If the American Cancer Society doesn't want you because you don't take a bath every day and you're disgusting, they'll send you home. You got to go find another nonprofit that'll take you. If you can't find anybody, then you're worse off than I can imagine. But because somebody's going to start a nonprofit for all the people nobody else wants, right?
I guess I don't know how these nonprofits work, so that's like a big question mark. I know that's what I'm thinking.
Okay. But they're capped at $15 an hour. They are doing something that Congress has approved. They're congressionally approved nonprofits. You either believe in representative government or you don't. And
I do believe in representative government, but so I didn't know nonprofits had to be approved. Yeah.
Sure, they have tax status and everything else. So these people are going to have to be further approved to participate in the job guarantee.
Okay.
Okay. And yes, there's still unemployment benefits. Maybe somebody wants to be unemployed looking for a job for 6 months or a year. They're going to have to be not forever. Like they're not forever. So we can leave that program alone, what we have now. But if somebody is unemployed and wants to is having trouble getting a job, they know that by getting in the job guarantee, working for a nonprofit, their odds of finding a job are way better than by being unemployed.
Right. So, but we are one of the pluses for the conservatives is you'll dissolve unemployment. Like you'll turn the unemployment office into the employment office.
Yeah. No, you don't need to do that. You could, but you don't need to. Now look, we interviewed the people in Argentina on the Jefes program making $30 a month, whatever they were getting paid. Said, would you rather stay home and get the money or come in and do the work? Every one of them said, we want to come in and do the work. It was like without exception. People don't want to stay at home and collect money. Some do, I know, but it's not much. And they want to do the work and they want to be useful to the community and move up in the world. Now, maybe that's not true in America. Maybe that's only true in Argentina.
Yeah, I was going to say.
If we have that problem where people would rather work for nonprofits at $15 an hour than work for $30 an hour at Google or something like that, we can deal with it when the time comes.
Yeah, I do.
Right now, we've got 6 or 8 million people on unemployment, maybe 10 million. Well, it's 15 million actually collecting something. That's going to drop to like 5. You're going to lose 10 to the private sector. So now you're worried about the last 5 when we just shrunk the problem from 15 to 5. Okay, this is like, okay, I agree with you. We can look at it. We can do more, but what are we waiting for? There's no question it's going to be 90% better than what we have now. I don't have to outrun the bear. I just have to outrun you. You know how that goes?
Yeah, definitely. No, I and also the amount of information that you get, I think, is super valuable because we have no idea how many people are collecting long-term unemployment who have no interest in getting a job whatsoever. Like they're just basically milking the system. I think conservatives believe that's 90% of the people on unemployment. Obviously, progressives believe it's like 5%.
Plus, I think everybody on disability is doing the same thing. And I don't know. But I do know that once we've offered a job to anyone who wants one, how many of those people go into the American Cancer Society every day to get a job.
I agree, yeah.
Okay, so at least they're doing that. They're not sitting at home anymore. You're talking about, people will get up, take a shower, get dressed, brush their teeth, comb their hair, go to work, and not do a whole lot all day. And so that's a problem versus having them stay home every day, which is what they're doing now. I don't see that.
It's not good for society either. I think there's an argument to be made with conservatives that embedding, people into social systems is better than having them sit home and watch TV.
How many stories do you hear about people who were unemployed and went out every day as if they were going to work because they couldn't face their families?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so people want to do something. They don't, there's a lot of it's an adaptive trait to do work. For most people, not for everybody, but adaptive traits are not universal, but they're very high percentages.
So I'm about halfway through the questions.
What am I doing here? I'm 72 years old. I don't need to do this.
Hey, I'm going to work till the day I die. That's me. Exactly.
But you don't think anybody else is like you. Okay.
No, I think a lot of people are like me, but I think there are people who aren't like me who would just assume play video games and not do anything.
And I've got a couple of them in my family, so I know that.
See, exactly, yes. So that is the question. That is like the sociological question. Yeah. Like, are we outnumbered? Are we really, the producers, the 5% that are going to work till we die, or is that the majority of the population? We don't know. One of the things that interests me about this whole idea is maybe we can come closer to answering that question.
No, we're going to get further away because what we're going to find.
Oh my God! Don't tell me.
No. The number of people doing nothing is going to drop.
Right.
Now we're going to say, okay, now why are 5% of the population doing nothing instead of 10 or whatever it is?
Mm-hmm.
We're going to find that out. So it'll clarify who is in that category and who isn't. Right now they're mixed in. They're mixed in with the guy who pretends he's going to work every day.
Yeah, you're right.
He's embarrassed to say he's not. So they're all mixed in right now. Let's sort it out.
So how would you?
No downside to sorting it out.
So here's another.
The downside used to be the financial cost. But MMT has eliminated that downside. So now let's just do it. There's no longer a downside.
Well, and I think one of the things that appeals to me is the fact that we're really wasting this productive labor, and most people can't stand the idea of waste.
Right.
So
your real wealth is everything you produce domestically.
Totally.
Plus whatever you import makes your pile of stuff bigger, minus what you have to export. That's just point of fact, a point of logic. There's no dispute to that.
So here,
let's get the domestic output up as high as possible.
I agree. Run the economy hot. Another pushback that I commonly get is, how will we prevent this from competing with the private sector? And I usually pitch it as like a private sector support.
The limited wage automatically does that. You can't get a raise. It's $15 an hour, unless Congress decides the cost of living's gone up and they're going to make it 16 or 17. But that's because everybody else is getting more also. So it's always going to be the lowest price employment in the economy. And it's going to be what people who want to not be in that category want to get out of.
Right.
Yeah. And they want to get a real public sector job. They want to be a police officer. They want to be a public health worker. They want to be, Google executive or whatever.
We've talked a little bit about this, but I'll ask you specifically. Critics of government programs are always worried about corruption. Is there a way to structure these programs to minimize these fears?
Yes. I don't want an organized job program where the federal government's organizing the work.
Right.
Okay. For this. Now, there's some things that you want that to happen, but not for this. That's why the federal government is okay at writing checks, but not for actually getting this work done. So that's why nonprofits are already there. You could do the same thing with state and local governments. Say, if you want to hire any assistants or anybody who's going to be on a temporary basis, because they're not going to get a raise and they're probably going to get hired by the private sector. But if you want to hire anybody for these transition jobs to do state and local government work, you can do it. We'll fund you at the $15 an hour rate of pay. I would worry about those people replacing normally paid public sector workers, but not so much. Okay, I don't worry about that a lot. Some people do, then maybe we wouldn't do that, but I just don't worry about that too much, because they won't be able to retain people they want to retain full-time answering the phone in the police department. They're going to have to pay them what they pay a receptionist in the police department. They're not going to be able to get away with a job guaranteed wage and then have them get a job 3 months later, and then the next guy gets a job 3 months later. They want somebody permanent. They're going to have to pay.
How does that work, Warren? The government is basically, the federal government is basically writing the nonprofit a check for the wages of whoever they employ. So they're basically a free employee paid for by the federal government. Is that how it works?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
And they're limited to $15 an hour. We've got to have, before we send check one, we've got to have a system in place to make sure they're actually paying people to work and it's not getting siphoned off somehow.
Right.
Something else. But, I don't think the American Heart Association, if they were approved, or American Cancer Society, or Diabetes Foundation, yes, they might siphon money off, but, it's less of a worry than other places where you might send money.
Yeah.
Okay.
So free market advocates are worried that the jobs program will have no price signals and therefore distort other sectors of the economy. Are there any arguments against this? It's
absolutely the opposite. It is the price signal. This is the price for nonprofit labor, $15 an hour. The private sector will pay some spread over that. The price signals will be there to have a quality adjusted employment. People who can earn $25 will go to the private sector. The private sector, there'll be enough aggregate demand where there'll be enough consumer dollars to pay for, to compete for, so the private sector will thrive. Okay, we're going to keep high levels of aggregate demand so they can afford to pay a spread, but not an ever increasing spread. That's where inflation comes in. It's a $10 spread today, it's a $15 spread tomorrow, it's a $25 spread. It doesn't work that way. It stays approximately where it is based on the perceived difference between the the job guarantee wage and what the private sector has to pay somebody as an enticement to move into it.
You've made this argument before, and I am
Yeah.
super persuaded by it. There are people who just are reflexively anti-government that I think really can't stomach the fact that the government sets prices. But you've made the argument that the government sets prices via spending, that they are the beginning of the price cycle. Do you want to go into that a little bit?
Yeah, so I started off with the money story. The government imposes a tax liability, and then it tells you what you have to do to get it. You serve in the Army, I'll give you $50,000 a year.
Right.
You sell me an apple for the cafeteria, I'll give you $1. It's pitching and we're catching. We have to pay this or we're going to lose our house or our car. Now it's coercive. It's, unpleasant. It introduces extreme levels of anxiety. You can probably trace a lot of drug use to this system. Okay. But it's effective. It supports the military. It supports the legal system. It supports the education system. It wins the wars. Everybody uses it to win the wars, and nobody has an alternative that can compete with it.
What would happen? What would happen if we decide, like, if say we had a problem with inflation and we decided we were going to deal with it? Obviously, this is a wild thought experiment, but what if we decided we were just going to cut all of the military wages in half?
Yeah.
Would that deal with the inflation issue?
Probably, but we'd probably lose all our soldiers and lose the war, so it'd be moot, right?
Well, I mean, let's say we're just in a peacetime situation.
Yeah, sure. It would, depending on where the inflation's coming from. We define it as consumer price index, which includes tobacco taxes on cigarettes. So if we just triple the tobacco tax and prices went up, firing the military is not going to bring that down, right? So you have to look at the detail behind these things before you can make these kinds of decisions. And normally what we call inflation is just the market allocating by price, not always, but sometimes. And you don't deal with that by creating,
Do you believe all prices begin with government spending, or is there
markets? Everybody knows, there's no dispute that markets can only determine relative value. This is worth 3 times that. If you say it's dollars, they can say, okay, this is $1, that's $3. You say it's yen, they'll say, okay, it's 100 yen, it's 300 yen. They really don't care what the numeraire is. They just determine relative value. The only information they get for absolute value comes from the government, which says we're paying $50,000 for a soldier. They don't have any other source of information other than relative value. They don't have any other source of absolute value in terms of the numeraire. Just as a point of logic, it has to. If the movie theater is selling movie tickets, it's that's not a very good example. But
I do have an example. I'm curious. Yeah. There's a video going around from, I think it's an Austrian school economist, and he talks about MMT, and he sets up an example of like a soldier buying apples, and he makes kind of the straw man of the soldier and the apple dealer have no idea what the price signals are because, they've just created this currency out of thin air and they have no idea what it's worth. And I'm like, dude, the soldier had to work to get the currency. He knows exactly what it's worth. Like he knows I spent a day to earn this much currency, and an apple is not worth a day's work, right?
The apple farmer has to decide whether he wants to join the army or sell the soldier apples.
Yes, exactly.
So, on day one, they might, he might not quit his Apple job the first day and join the army, but that's the market process that sets relative value.
Right. Yeah, it's an interesting concept. I'm curious.
The Austrians know that. They know how numeraires work. I've talked to them.
Okay.
That's why they have a gold standard. The gold standard is the government setting one price, gold, the numeraire, and then everything else reflects relative value. If you leave the numeraire as 1 ounce of gold at $1,800, then everything else is relative value to that. So they understand that there's an exogenous setting of one price in a market economy, at least one price, that then gets reflected as relative value. It's all part of their math, the maths of their. That's why I said it's applicable to fixed exchange rate.
Right. Do you have an opinion on why I mean, my feeling is that they just cannot stand the idea that the government has any influence on the value of money, and so they feel if they take it out of if they make it a gold standard.
I sympathize with them, but even if they make it a gold standard, the government's still setting the conversion rate for gold. But I sympathize with the issue. Look, if you go to a football game and you stand up, you can see better. But if everybody stands up, nobody can see better and nobody can sit down, right? So you need collective action, which I call government. Now, they might distinguish between collective action and government. I don't know, logically, for this example, it's the same thing. You need the stadium to tell you whether you can sit down or stand up. So they say, okay, you can only stand up for 10 seconds when somebody scores a goal or something like that. All right. Maybe I hate the owner of the Yankees. I don't like the government. I wish they didn't have to do this. But in this case, it's like, all right, if that's all you're going to do, I don't like it. I don't like the idea that you have that power over me, but I'm okay. I'm going to tolerate it rather than have us all stand up and nobody can see. Right. So that's what we're faced with. We're faced with this fallacies of composition like that, where we either have to have collective action or we're going to have this race to the bottom that's disastrous. And so we have to put up with this thing called government, and we, make the best of it and participate in. It's what do they call it? Some kind, it's a continuous struggle.
Yeah.
To keep it what it is, and it's got massive corruption. It's got major problems, but without it, we've got these horrendous races to the bottom, all over, and it's a lot worse. So
I agree. Yeah.
Yeah.
I often tell people, and I got this from the book, The Dictator's Handbook. He goes through the taxes in a lot of these dictatorial regimes, and they're 90%.
Yeah.
We're not anywhere close to being taxed at 90%. Thank goodness, right?
Yeah, yeah. And if you ask anybody there, how are things? You know what they say?
It sucks.
No. They say, "Oh, can't complain."
Oh yeah, exactly right, exactly right.
Oh,
they think it sucks, but they say I can't complain.
Exactly. It's got a different meaning than it does over here.
Yeah.
Yeah, you ask anybody in Cuba, how are things? Oh, can't complain.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Yeah.
So I think we already answered this, but I'll ask it anyway. Will there be any jobs for high-skilled workers? How can a job guarantee program benefit someone with a narrow skill set that is pushed out by a changing market? So this is like a high-tech person.
So here's how it helps. You got a pipeline company, your refinery needs a pipe fitter. And there's pipe fitters who are in the unemployment line. He really doesn't want to hire those guys. He doesn't know if they're drugs and get drunk every day, they come in dirty, whatever. Just doesn't know. He doesn't want to take a chance, so he goes out and hires a pipe fitter from somewhere else. He might fly a guy in from India who's a pipe fitter, right? Rather than hire somebody who's unemployed. If the guy goes into a transition job as a pipe fitter, he's still out advertising he's looking for work as a pipe fitter. And now he's coming into work every day. He's got a supervisor who says he's a good guy and he's really looking to work. His odds of getting a job are up, just gone up by 90%. 9 times, I guess. He's got a 10 times better chance of getting a job than anybody else. So it's going to help him in that regard. Do we still need employment agencies? Sure. You go to an employment agency, you fill out your resume. And by the way, I'm in the job guarantee, so here's my employment record. I've been coming in on time every day for the last 3 months, and here's my resume. So
sounds a lot better. Yeah, definitely.
Now I hear proponents of the job guarantee get interviewed, and they say, well, what are all these people going to do? And they say, oh, lots of useful work. And I go, wrong answer. They ask me what they're going to do, exactly what I told you. They're going to transition into the private sector. And we're going to measure the success of this program by how many transition to the private sector. Well, what about all the useful work that needs to be done in the Green New Deal and all that? Just go hire them under the normal way Congress hires people. Don't use this for that. You're going to undermine the entire program. You're going to lose the public sector support for what you're doing because they don't want that to be the source of people coming into the government. Okay, and it's not right. So, okay, I've got to run on you pretty soon. So if you can,
I have 2 more questions, and I figured maybe 5 more minutes. Is that good, or do you need to go now?
That's good.
Okay, so these aren't really jobs programs questions, but they're interesting, and I thought maybe you'd have a quick answer. So how does any policymaker use MMT to determine a limit on deficit spending, government lending that might cause hyperinflation?
Strength. Can you get this one? Just tell him I'll be. Okay,
so I am curious.
What he has to do is when he sees a bill come in front of Congress or whatever, he has to have the CBO score it based on its inflationary impact, instead of whether it adds to the deficit or not.
Right.
So once they score it and they say, okay, this is going to add, 0.2 tenths to the inflation rate over the next 5 years. This is going to add 3.5 points to the inflation rate. Then they can have the debate whether they want to do that or not.
Does CBO automatically give feedback on inflation, or do they just give deficit feedback?
They just give deficit feedback.
Which is useless.
Well, it didn't used to be when we were on the gold standard, because it would determine whether we were at risk of losing our gold supply. But now it's inapplicable.
Right. Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. So the last question is, what limiting principle prevents MMT from being, as it's incorrectly stereotyped by its opponents, an endless excuse for loose money and endless spending? What is a good limiting principle?
Well, the thing is, you can say that about Keynesian economics. Oh, that's just a license to spend. And then, so people who want to promote that, whatever rhetoric, they're going to pick on somebody to say it. Right now, it happens to be.
I 100% agree with you, Warren. But the deficit is something that people use in their minds. That's kind of a weight against overspending. MMT acknowledges that overspending is obviously an issue because you're worried about inflation. But I don't know that we have something tangible that people can say. Like I read Stephanie Kelton's piece in the New York Times about Biden's spending bill and how he can go bigger. But I'm curious, where do they get these numbers from?
Okay, well, what MMT has to do is, insist on the Fed and the OMB, to score these programs.
Right.
Okay, and the Fed's got 500 PhDs. Let them start scoring these programs for inflation. Inflation's their job. Start scoring these proposals on inflation. Well, the Fed gives you an inflation forecast. Right now, their forecast is 2%. And they meet and they change their forecast once Congress has passed legislation.
Right.
And they might pass a bill and they raise it to 2.5.
So,
okay, well, have them tell you that before they pass it.
So
they've already got the guys who do this.
So it sounds like the answer is really we need the PhDs to focus their attention on inflation and not the deficit.
Before Congress passes it. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
Have the Fed score it before they pass it. Why wait till afterwards?
Right. Okay. Well, you've been very generous with your time, Warren. Maybe we can do another discussion on something else.
Oh, anytime.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Take care. I'll let you go. And this was great.